Greetings from the Tech Cave, Fenris here, and today we're taking a look at the Nintendo 64. Now, this N64 was part of a broken console lot from DK Oldies on eBay, and I was able to fix up most of the systems in that lot, including this one here, aside from like a couple of N64s, which unfortunately the boards were just too far gone for me to do anything with, so I just scrapped them for parts. Now, all those other systems I either reshelled or sold them off, while this N64 remained in my collection because I had intended on doing something with this N64 video related wise, but I never got around to it until now. And the reason why I'm getting to it now is for two reasons. One, there's a friend of mine on YouTube who goes by the name YewfNet, and she had mentioned during a Twitch stream that she was interested in acquiring a Nintendo 64. So since I had this spare N64 laying around, I figured why not? Number two is, by the time that you're watching this video, it will be my 30th birthday. So I figured to celebrate 30 years of life, why not do a video that focuses on the system that started it all for me? So let's get this unit apart and get to work. So now that we got the system taken apart, let's go over the game plan. Now, I'm not going to go over capacitor replacements or thermal pad replacements with this unit, mainly because I had already done that when I originally repaired it. So instead, what we're going to do is something completely different, and it actually relates to the motherboard revision. Now, if you look behind the cartridge slot, you can see that there is a marking that says NUS CPU 04. And the reason why that's relevant is because this is the final motherboard revision that has analog RGB outputs. They're just not connected to the multi-out. Meaning, we can use a basic RGB mod kit like the N64 RGB from Voltar to restore RGB on this system. Now, what makes the 04 revision even more different than that is, unlike CPU 03 and previous, the CPU 04 revision has all the landings for a CSYNC circuit, but it's not connected because all the components were removed, but the landings for the components are still there. So I figured, let's make this a little bit more interesting. So instead of doing the Voltar RGB mod, we're going to be doing it the old-fashioned way. Now, this is a THS7316 that's been connected to a SOP to DIP adapter. But in addition to that, we're going to restore the CSYNC circuit. Now, I have all the components here, and I'll link in the description below the forum post in which I learned about this, but we're going to be rebuilding the sync circuit that's missing on this motherboard. So let's get this thing fully unscrewed and removed, and we can get to it. So now that we're nice and zoomed in, we're going to focus first on rebuilding the N64's CSYNC circuit. And in order to do so, we need to repopulate R15, R16, Q1, R1, R14, and C22. Now, these are all going to be 0603 in package size, and on screen right now is a schematic that lays out just how the N64's CSYNC circuit is built. And I have to give credit to the Crayon King on AtariAge for providing the schematic. So let's not waste any more time and repopulate the board. So now that we got the CSYNC circuit restored, we can now move on to the next step, and that is the RGB mod. Now, under normal circumstances, with the more modern N64 RGB mods, all we would have to do is take a little mod board, put it over the multi-out, and run 3 wires to R8, R9, and R10, and then you'd basically be done. But considering the fact that we're using a SOP-to-DIP adapter with the THS7316 on it, what we need to do is we're going to take some component legs and pop it in the holes for R8, R9, and R10. Take our SOP-to-DIP adapter and basically plop it in. Now, we will still need to run wires for 5V and ground, and with the more modern boards, we don't need to do that since it's all in the multi-out, but considering the fact that we're not pulling from the multi-out, we need to find a different source for 5V and ground. So during the transition period, I was doing some poking around with my multimeter, and I found that when we probe 5V here, and we touch this, little via here for C109, we get 5V. Now, as for ground, which we can just probe this side here, I found that ground can be pulled from either the top pad of C109 or the top pad of C88. So, what I'm going to do is, for our 5V and ground wire, I'm going to run 5V to the via of C109, and as for ground, I'm going to pull it from the top pad of C88. So let's not waste any more time and get to installing. So now that we got the THS7316 circuit installed, we can now move on to the final step, and that is attaching our outputs to the multi-out. Now, in order to figure out which wire goes where, we first need to look at the pinout for the THS7316. So the way it works is that if pin 1 receives an analog input, pin 8 is our analog output, or amplified analog output. So in our case, R8, R9, and 10 are red, green, and blue respectively. So we have RGB, meaning for pins 8, 7, and 6, it's R, G, and B. Meanwhile, pin 4 is our 5V and pin 5 is our ground. So as far as where do they connect to the multi-out, well, it's actually pretty simple to determine because as you can see, most of the other signals are actually silk screened onto the board, well, except for CSYNC, but we can clearly see there's a trace running from pin 3 all the way to the CSYNC output circuit here, meaning these 3 pins are R, G, and B. So we're going to take our 3 wires from here and run it to pins 1, 2, and 4. So let's get to it. Alright, so with the RGB mod installed as well as the CSYNC circuit restored, all that's left to do now is to give this system a test. Okay, so I have everything kind of put back together here. So I got the expansion pack installed as well as the power supply and my RGB to D-Sub15 adapter, which is outputting CSYNC to the RetroTink 5X. So all that's left to do is to plug in a game and fire it up. And as we can see, back on the menu here, we're in full color. Let's flick this power off. So we've confirmed that the N64 does work, as well as the RGB and CSYNC mods also work. So now that we've confirmed everything is good, all we need to do now is to put this thing back together and do some final tests. Okay, so there's one more thing that I'd like to discuss prior to reassembly, and that is the bottom shielding. Now, technically, we don't need this bottom shielding anymore, mainly because it was used only for FCC regulations. They believe that by adding this shielding, it would protect the system from any outgoing or incoming radio frequencies. But the thing is, though, that's kind of irrelevant, and the shielding didn't really serve its purpose anyways, so just kind of useless. But say that you want to keep the shielding. Well, as long as you make sure that the THS-7316 is as flush as possible and all three of these wires are layered like this, it should clear. But let's say that you're worried that maybe something might impact the bottom shield and the shielding will dent in and short on the THS-7316. Well, what we could do is we could take some Kapton tape, get like a nice strip, and just layer it on there. Now, this part is completely optional, and personally speaking, I don't think it's really necessary. I think it's just easier to just get rid of the bottom shielding. But if you really are protective about the THS-7316 and making sure that it doesn't short on anything, then sure, you could put a layer of Kapton tape, put the bottom shielding back on, and it's still fine. So let's go ahead and reassemble the N64. Okay, so there's one more thing I wanted to focus on real quick, and that is the top shell of the N64, or more specifically, the cartridge throat that it came with. Now, as you can see, this is a cartridge throat that is configured specifically for North American N64 games, meaning we can play our North American N64 games on it just fine, but we cannot play Japanese N64 games. And the reason why that is because the two tabs that are located in the backside are in different spots compared to what the Japanese N64 game expects. Now, hardware-wise on the other hand, there's really only two regions, NTSC and PAL, with NTSC typically being like North America and Japan, while PAL is basically most of Europe. So, with that being said though, you can't play PAL games on an NTSC system just due to the fact that they use different lockout chips. However, you can play Japanese games on a North American system and vice versa if you can get around this cartridge slot problem. Now, what some people used to do in the past is they would kind of Dremel out these two tabs. It looks a little nasty and the end result doesn't look particularly good because, well, you end up with two big holes on the cartridge slot. So instead of drilling out the holes here, we're going to instead replace it with this. This is a quote-unquote region-free cartridge slot, which region-free is in quotes because, as I said earlier, PAL games you can't play on NTSC systems and vice versa. but this will allow us to play Japanese games on our North American N64 and vice versa. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the springs back on our 2 cartridge flaps and install this little baby. Alright, so we got the N64 all hooked up and ready for testing. So we're going to plug in our copy of Donkey Kong 64, fire that up, and see if it still works. And it looks like it does. So once we get through this sequence here, we're going to just see if we can skip straight to the title screen and the menu. Looks like we're able to get to the title screen. And it looks like we're getting into the menu. Alright, enough of that. If I sat here and played Donkey Kong 64, we'd be here for hours. So let's not do that, and instead, let's test our final game, and that is our Japanese copy of Super Smash Bros. So, as you can hear, it slots in just fine. And it powers on just fine. But next, we're going to go to the Versus mode, and we're going to test all 4 controller ports. So, as you can see, controller port 1 works. Controller port 2 works. Controller port 3 works. And controller port 4 works. So we've confirmed that this unit is fully working. So with that out of the way, this was a lot of fun to do. I didn't really see any videos on doing the older method of RGB mod on N64, or even the CSYNC restore for the NUS CPU04. But that's not without reason. Realistically speaking, this method of RGB mod is very outdated. Technically, you can just get any modern N64 RGB mod for this type of board, and it would simplify the process much easier, as well as buffer CSYNC without having to put all those components back in. But you know what? Much like revisiting old games from the past, it's sometimes fun to also revisit old hardware mods from the past. And that's exactly what we did here. So yeah, I hope Yuffie does get some enjoyment out of this N64 just as much as I enjoyed putting it together. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And if you liked what you saw, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.